Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again, Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History. What we're going to look at is the changing demographics of the country and the changes in culture in the country because of the influx of immigrants that come into the country between 1865, of course, and 1912. Post 1890, during the second wave of European immigration, the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe made their way here. So after 1890, we want to look at a different group of immigrants that are coming to the country, and they're primarily coming from Southern Europe and from Eastern Europe, from places like Serbia, from Croatia. They're coming from places like Albania, Greece, Italy. And we're going to be looking at that particular group, and they're not going to be as well received when they come into the country, of course, as was the people from Western Europe. The second wave included the Poles, the Slavs, the Italians, the Greeks, the Russians. Some of from these ethnic groups were rejected the cities and went to the West to pursue free land from the Homestead Act. One of the things that we'll find if you go to America's Midwest today, you'll see a pretty strong contingent of these types of ethnic groups, of course, that moved there. You're also going to see a lot of Germans and a lot of Scandinavians when it comes to places like Minnesota, when it comes to the Dakotas, when it comes to Wisconsin. So we're going to be looking at these groups, and some of them will reject the cities and won't stay in the cities, but will continue to move on in hopes of finding, that great farmland in the Great Plains. Those who remained in the cities lived in ethnic neighborhoods and retained their own language, customs, and culture. And they were in these ghettos. And once again, when we hear the word ghetto, in most cases we think of it the same way we think of barrio. We think, of course, of it being a negative thing. But these ghettos were ethnic neighborhoods where people, of course, moved to see people and live with people that looked like them and spoke like them and had the same cultures as them. So if you go to places like New York today, they have places, of course, where you have like Little Italy, you have Chinatown, you have different places where you have these ethnic neighborhoods, and they live in these particular places because culturally and historically, that's where they've always lived. And that was a problem for a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans thought when the immigrants came here, they should give up their old ways and their old culture, of course, and become more Americanized. But if you think about America today, of course, the American culture is many cultures. So we look at something, of course, that's a little bit different from what some people envisioned. More religious diversity was a significant impact of the second wave of immigration. Greek and Russian Orthodox, Jewish and Catholics were the primary religions. And this country primarily, of course, was a Christian country, but we're going to find that a lot of different religions, of course, will be introduced, which also causes a little bit of a stink. And even if you look at our country today in terms of looking at Christians or Christian nationalism, of course, it exists in the country today, a lot of people feel like that when the immigrants come in and things are beginning to change. So we're looking at a situation where the same issues that they had at that time are going to bleed over to our time today. Immigrants from Europe, will give you a brief graphic of the first and second wave, and you'll notice that in 1870, the blue, which is Northwestern Europe, was the most prominent thing, and Central Europe, blue and red. And what you're going to notice by 1910, Central Europe, of course, becomes, and Southern Europe and Eastern Europe start to dominate. But by 1920, though, what you'll notice, of course, let me go back. By 1920, though, what you'll notice, of course, that happens is Northwestern Europe makes a comeback, and then Southern Europe makes a comeback. But the people from Central Europe and Eastern Europe, those numbers go down, and they go down because of what we call nativism. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Asian immigration. Just as we had European immigration, we said almost 500,000 Asians, of course, came to the country during that period from 1865 to 1900 or so. Most of the Chinese, of course, that came here, they came as servants, of course, and railroad workers. They were the ones responsible for building the Central Pacific side, of course, of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Japanese arrived around the early 1900s. Asian immigrants entered the United States of America, not at Ellis Island, of course, on the West Coast, on the East Coast, but Angel Island on the West Coast. Now, Angel Island on the West Coast was a little different from Ellis Island, of course, on the East Coast. In the fact that one of the things, Ellis Island ran pretty smoothly. In some cases, it would be months before Asians were processed to enter the country. Nativism. This is one of those terms, of course, that we had in terms of the vocabulary. Nativism is the belief that America should be for Americans. And what nativists believe is that immigration into the country, of course, should be limited. The Irish in the mid-1800s were the first to experience the feelings of nativism. Many native-born Americans resented them for taking away jobs, land, resisting American culture. Remember that Do Now activity that we had? And we're talking about the same types of things. The late 1800s saw the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe face nativism. The American Protective Association lobbied against Catholics in the United States of America. Because remember, once again, most America, of course, in terms of looking at religion, was Christianity or Protestantism. So now we're looking at these people that are coming in from Southern and Central Europe, Eastern Europe, with the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, of course, and the Jews, of course, that were entering, and the Catholics that were entering. A lot of Americans that were traditionally Protestants didn't like the idea that the country, of course, was becoming more Catholic, becoming more Jewish, becoming more Russian Orthodox, becoming more Greek Orthodox. The Chinese Exclusion Act was one of the first official acts of nativism, and what it basically did is it outlawed Chinese immigration into the United States of America for 10 years, and then it denied Chinese immigrants citizenship. The Immigration Act of 1882 gave the federal government oversight of immigration and not the states. It became such an issue that the federal government of the United States of America took away states' ability to regulate immigration. They wanted it to fall, of course, under the head of the federal government. Immigrant optimism. The U.S. was the land of opportunity and hard work in the minds of most immigrants, and could give them a better life than they had in their old countries. In short, America offered immigrants a chance to be free and successful. The first guided reading questions that we had, those two guided reading questions that we had at the beginning, what we want to do is, of course, go through and look and see about answering those. You should have written down enough notes that you should be able, of course, to answer these questions. So we'll look at each one of them individually, of course, and see what answer you came up with. First question, how did the immigrants of the late 1800s change American society? And number two, why did nativists oppose immigration? So think about those for a few seconds. Go ahead and write your answers down. We'll come back in a few moments and we'll see what answers, of course, you came up with. Okay, you should have plenty enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and formulate answers. So let's go and see what you came up with. How did immigrants of the late 1800s change American society? They changed the religious and the cultural makeup of the United States of America. When we said America was primarily Protestant, became more Catholic, became more Jewish, became more Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. It changed new languages, clothing, customs. Because remember now, when they came here, in most cases, they didn't assimilate well. They, instead of going and assimilating or blending in with most of America at large, American citizens at large, they retained their own customs in these ghettos. Immigrants would provide a labor force to drive American industrialization. Immigrants would also bring with them grievances that cause violence. In some cases, you're going to find that some of the people that came in, they had problems with each other in Europe. And when they came to America, those problems just didn't disappear. There was I'm a real big TV person. There was a movie called The Gangs of New York. I suggest that you go and watch it. If you go and watch The Gangs of New York, you're going to see some of those old grievances, of course, and you're going to see that they would have these knockdown, drag-out fights, in gang fights, of course, in the streets of New York, over some of these old grievances, of course, that were brought to the new country, the United States of America, from the old country in Europe. Immigrants with neighborhood rivalries would sometimes lead to violence, as we said. And then look at question number two. Why did the nativists oppose immigration? Well, they feared that America was losing its identity. Same feelings that a lot of Americans have today. Immigrants were taking native jobs. Once again, the same feelings that a lot of Americans have today. And they would work for less money, and diversity in their minds was out of control. America was looking a lot less like what America was looking like. And that was something, of course, that frightened a lot of people. And a lot of people would argue that's the same kind of thing that's happening today. Map questions. We have a few review questions that we're going to go over. Please, once again, take your journals out if I were you, and I would write these questions down because more than likely you will see these questions at some point again. During the late 1840s, the famine caused by the potato blight caused which group of people to immigrate to the U.S. in large numbers? Well, the answer should be the Irish. They came in the 1840s and 1850s primarily because of the potato blight and the fact that they didn't have access to a lot of available land because most of the wealthy controlled the land. That basically takes us to the end of lesson 1 on immigration. Please do what I've told you to do before. Don't take my word for it. When you look at America's history, remember it's your history. Don't take my word. Go ahead and do your own research. And when you do your own research, you can make up your mind in terms of what you feel is true or not true. But the biggest thing is this here. America's history is your history. So do your own research. Have a great day.